Chair calls the House Civil Law Committee back into order. Members, before we begin testimony, I'd like to notify the audience that there will be members of the committee who will be exiting and entering the committee room today because there are other bills and other committees going on at the same time. And you should in no way consider this a reflection of how important they feel this bill is. So please be patient with members, and also note that they are listening to testimony, and if they're gone, that doesn't mean they don't care. They just have other bills to vote on. So beginning where we left off, the next testifier I have listed is Dale Carpenter.
Mr. Chair?
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I forget, I want to request a roll call. And then are you taking comments at all right now, or are you going to wait until the testifiers are done?
I do intend to wait for committee member debate until after the testifiers have completed.
All right, very good. Thank you.
And after Mr. Dale Carpenter, who will be Grace Fink. After Grace Fink will be Pauline Nixon.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Representative Clark.
Mr. Carpenter doesn't wish to testify necessarily at this time. He's a resource that's available, but he doesn't want to make a statement at this particular time. Doesn't need to do that.
Thank you. So the next testifier will be Grace Fink. Is Grace Fink here? Ms. Fink, please take a seat, state your name, and identify yourself for the record, and proceed with your testimony, reminding members that testifiers are allotted 2 minutes. We will hold up a yellow card when you have 15 seconds left, and we will hold up a red card when your testimony should complete. Please respect that for the committee. Thank you. Please proceed.
Hello, my name is Grace Fink. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for allowing me to be here today. I am standing here because marriage between a man and a woman is extremely important to me. I would like to begin by asking you a question. What does a good and stable society mean? For me, a good and stable society is one that protects and encourages the people to live up to their fullest potential. When I look around at our society, I see certain social institutions which greatly impact us. For example, the government and military systems are both social institutions which serve the people in important ways. Keeping this in mind, we must not forget that marriage between a man and a woman is also a social institution. The United States Supreme Court has said that marriage is fundamental to the very existence and survival of the human race. This is why the government is involved in the marriage debate, because it is a time-tested institution which is of utmost importance to our society. Traditional marriage is the most pro-child institution ever created. Some of the benefits children receive from traditional marriage are reduced poverty and material hardship, increased likelihood of completing high school, college, and achieving high-status jobs, better physical health, less depression, fewer suicides, and increased likelihood of good relationships, and reduced rates of criminal behavior and child abuse. The overwhelming body of social science evidence establishes that children do best when raised by their married mother and father. Whether talking about poverty rates, physical and mental health, education attainment, or general happiness, science shows that children are better when raised in an intact home by their married parents. If we redefine marriage as genderless, what effect will this have on our children? What good architect would tweak the design of a major building before first testing the new design? The same goes for marriage. We cannot tweak the definition of marriage when the future generations are at stake. In conclusion, I would like to sincerely thank each and every one of you for listening to me today.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Fink. Next testifier, Pauline Nixon, followed by Pauline Nixon will be Annie Kopacek.
I have copies of my testimony.
The page will please distribute copies of Ms. Nixon's testimony.
Chairman Lesh, members of the Civil Law Committee, thank you for this opportunity to speak to you about House File 1054, the bill to allow same-gender marriage. My name is Pauline Nixon. My daughter, Dr. Andrea Nixon, is my middle child and a lesbian. In 2008, she and her partner of many years, Paula Lackey, eloped to San Francisco. Andrea's degree is in the administration of higher education. When she was finishing her doctoral degree, she was asked if she would like to design a position for herself in the dean's office at Carleton College, where she's worked for about 20 years. She agreed to do so and is now a lecturer and a researcher at Carleton. Prior to finishing her doctoral degree at the University of Minnesota, Andrea received a master's degree in computer science online from George Washington University. Sunday, 2 days ago, I asked Andrea what she thought I should say in my testimony today. She responded with 2 sentences. She was quite on target. She said, people want to be able to care for one another, and people need equal means to do that. That's exactly what you will be allowing if you pass House File 1054, and that's my request of you. Please pass House File 1054. Not everyone can afford to go halfway across the continent to get married, as Andrea and Paula did. Finally, something very important. Nothing in this bill prohibits any religious association, religious corporation, or religious society that is not organized for private property from taking any action with respect to the provision of goods, services, facilities, or accommodations directly related to the solemnization or celebration of a marriage that's in violation of its religious beliefs. And thank you very much for hearing me.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Nixon. Next testifier, Annie Kopacek. And Michael Bailey. The next testifier after this will be Michael Bailey. Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
My name is Annie Kopacek, and thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for hearing me today. I am a recent University of St. Thomas graduate and founder of the Organization of Students for Marriage at the St. Thomas campus. I urge you, please do not redefine marriage because you think that the youth does not support marriage between one man and one woman. I assure you that I speak not only for so many St. Thomas students, but also for other countless young people who know how marriage, and specifically the distinct roles of both mothers and fathers within marriage, affects children and society. If you strip gender from the state's definition of marriage, you effectively say to me that within the context of marriage, my unique gift of self as a woman, as a potential wife and mother, have no difference in that of a man. It is precisely because I am a woman and I have a unique gift to offer the world as a woman that marriage cannot and should not be legally deemed genderless. As a young single woman hoping to one day raise a family, I implore you not to use public policy to, in effect, regard my feminine gift or another's masculine gift as interchangeable. Do not esteem the unique place of a mother or a father within family life as insignificant to my potential children and grandchildren. It is insulting to the very dignity of every one of us, regardless of marital state in life or sexual orientation, to erase any acknowledgement of our most basic contributions to the well-being and growth of our communities. It is vital to the flourishing of society that, when it comes to marriage, our laws reflect the dignity of our personhood as male and female, and in that way secure a more stable future for our children. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Kopacek. Next testifier, Michael Bailey, followed by Brett Stevens.
Hello, I think I have an expanded version of my notes that I also think are being distributed.
Thank you. The page is distributing those now.
Thanks. And I also should note that I'm here representing Catholics for Marriage Equality Minnesota.
Please proceed with your testimony.
Thank you.
Did you introduce yourself for the record, Mr. Bailey?
No, my name is Michael Bailey, and I'm Executive Coordinator of Catholics for Marriage Equality Minnesota.
Thank you. Please proceed.
I'm here in this capacity to take the opportunity to clarify the oft-quoted statement that the Catholic Church opposes same-sex marriage. This is only true if we limit the Church to its clerical leadership. In reality, however, this leadership does not encompass the totality of the Church, nor does it speak for all Catholics on this issue. Credible polls show that over 2/3 of Catholics support marriage equality. In fact, U.S. Catholics support gay marriage by a larger margin than the general public. As a Catholic, I welcome this reality and its grounding in the best aspects of the Catholic faith and in the Catholic people's experience and acceptance of their gay children, siblings, parents, neighbours and co-workers. I take heart in the role that Catholics are playing so as to advance compassion and justice in our society. I want to assure you as lawmakers that the majority of Catholics do not support the Catholic hierarchy imposing its understanding of sexuality and marriage onto wider society. This is especially true when one acknowledges that the bishop's understanding of these realities is out of step with two important sources of truth in the Catholic tradition. They are the collective wisdom of the Catholic people and the insights provided by Catholic theologians. Catholics are not in theory opposed to the bishops making statements on important social issues, but we know that their speaking out should always seek to expand the circle of welcome and inclusion. This is not the case with their activism around marriage equality, and for many Catholics this is a source of pain and scandal. In conclusion, I want to assure you that the majority of Catholics would see the passing of marriage equality legislation as being in keeping with our Church's call for individuals and institutions to embody justice and compassion. The majority would support the passing of House File 1054. I hope you won't disappoint them. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Bailey. Next testifier, Brett Stevens, followed by Jacob Melson. Please introduce yourself and proceed with your testimony.
My name is Brett Stevens, and while I'm a columnist at Lavender Magazine, I am testifying solely as a private citizen. My partner Randy and I have been together for 15 years. We believe our relationship deserves recognition by the state of Minnesota. There are thousands of same-sex couples like us throughout the state, and the time has come for our state government to respect our lives and relationships. Let me explain what I mean. We organize and order our lives together just like straight married couples do. We plan our retirement, we take care of each other. If one goes to school, the other works more. If one stays home to take care of the children, the other may pick up another job to make ends meet. As a result, our financial lives are intertwined and our plans are joint. We need the state to recognize these realities. It is because this issue is so important and so compelling, we cannot wait and see if same-sex marriage will pass. The Minnesota poll that came out last week showed 53% of the public doesn't support same-sex marriage. Speaker Thiessen and Majority Leader Bach have both repeatedly said they doubt it can pass. It's time to believe them and face the truth. These past 4 months of interviewing people, studying polls, researching strategies, and the past histories of political movements has brought me to one conclusion. It is time for a compromise so our relationships get the recognition and the respect they deserve. We need someone to propose a civil union bill. I have talked with people for both sides of this issue for the past few months, and I've come to a realization. Reasonable people can disagree on this issue, and reasonable people can come to an agreement. There are those who believe marriage is only between a man and a woman. There are those who believe gender is irrelevant. I think the people of Minnesota are ready to say our relationships matter, but so do our traditions. Same-sex couples should be recognized, and we can do it with civil union legislation. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Stevens. Also, if the testifiers would please remember to sign in. The page is working diligently to ensure that all testifiers are on the record. That is the rules of the House and rules of this committee, so please do sign in before or after you testify. The next testifier is Jacob Melson, followed by Daniel Dobson. Mr. Melson. Daniel Dobson. Is Daniel Dobson here? Next testifier, Kirk Allen Dement. After Mr. Dement will be Neil Tao. Mr. Tao, you're after Mr. Dement. Have a seat. Make sure you sign in. Mr. Dement, please introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
My name is Kirk Allen Dement, and I'd like to say that I've been following the conversations for the past 2 years and looking for a legitimate reason, a secular reason for why same-sex marriage would be denied. And what I found over the last 2 years is that it breaks down to 2 areas, children and society. So what I did is I looked at those organizations in our society that have unique expertise in the area of child development, human social systems, both past and present. And what I found to a T, these organizations, professional organizations, have come out in support of same-sex marriage or equal parenting rights for gay or lesbian couples. And I'd like to list some of these organizations that I found: the American Psychological Association, the American Psychiatric Association, American Sociological Association, the American Anthropological Association, the American Academy of Family Physicians, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, American Medical Association, the Child Welfare League of America, the North American Council on Adoptable Children. These groups are respected, authoritative groups in our society, and I could not find one group that had the comparable authority that opposed same-sex marriage. And this is really telling when people quote research, that these groups that are from the medical, psychological, psychiatric fields, etc., come out in support of same-sex marriage. I believe that if legislators cannot find a legitimate secular reason for denying same-sex marriage, which I am confident there is not one that has been presented, that you swiftly act to legalize same-sex marriage, because justice delayed is justice denied. And I'd also like to mention, too, when research is done, talked about in terms of traditional parenting, it's comparing kids to parents that traditional marriages with single-parent families and cohabitating heterosexual couples, and not same-sex couples. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Dement. Neil Tao.
Jean, Soksabay. Chào bạn, Buenos Dias, bonsoir tout le monde, and good evening, Mr. Chair, and member of the committee. I'm Neil Tao, committee leader from the Hmong community. I'm a professor at Metropolitan State University. I'm a father of 4 children. I'm here to testify to support this bill. Let me tell you that as an immigrant, a lot of them don't speak English well, but they too support my view that this is a good bill. Let me remind you, I was a refugee from Laos and a member of the Hill tribe named Hmong, a minority of the minority. I understand the term minority, disadvantage, disfranchised, and at times feel unwelcoming. So let me tell you that I'm very proud of Minnesota. Minnesota is the first state to elect a Hmong woman to office in 1991 for St. Paul Public School Board, Chua Lee. And of course, me more for Minnesota's first Hmong American state legislator in 2001. I want to make sure that Minnesota do not let behind a lot of Hmong men, a lot of Hmong and immigrant LGBT members for equal opportunity, equal protection, and fairness. This is a beautiful state. They give us, the immigrant, a lot of opportunity. I want to make sure that taxpayer, Hmong, or immigrant LGBT have the same protection, the same equality. We're here to build our life. We're here to enjoy our life. We're here to be a productive citizen. Thank you, Mr. Chair and member of the committee.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Tao. Next testifier will be Don Portwood. After Don Portwood will be August Berkshire. Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
My name is Don Portwood. I was born and raised in a conservative farming community in Nebraska. My wife and I will be celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary in 2 months. I am pastor of Lindale United Church of Christ in Minneapolis. In 2006, Lindale Church was the first church in Minnesota to vote as a congregation to stop doing civil weddings. For the last 8 years, I've only done blessing ceremonies for straight and gay couples. I no longer participate in what I feel is an unjust policy of the state, so I no longer sign wedding licenses on behalf of the state. Instead, on behalf of my church, we bless all couples in the eyes of God. A straight couple has to get a wedding license at the county. If as a Christian or person of faith you disagree with what we did, we should sit down and have a Bible study and talk about why we believe our decision was being faithful to the God we know through Jesus Christ. But that discussion of beliefs should not be taking place here. My hope would be that the state would legally wed people, issue licenses to all couples, and then if a couple wanted to have a blessing ceremony and knew a church, synagogue, or mosque that would bless them, they would do the religious ceremony. For the people who fear changing the tradition of marriage as they know it, I invite you to trust and open to the possibility that God's Spirit is moving today, just like it moved in the Apostle Peter in Acts 10, beyond the scripture, traditions, and understanding he'd grown up with. Same-gender couples are having blessing ceremonies, and they are having children. That will happen whether this law is passed or not. Being Nebraska raised, I think I'm pretty conservative. I'm for supporting monogamy. I'm for the state providing support in all the ways it does for all couples and their families, like my wife and our love and our commitment has been supported for nearly 40 years. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Pastor Portwood. Next testifier, August Berkshire, followed by Simon Radecki. Please introduce yourself for the record and begin your testimony, Mr. Berkshire.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is August Berkshire, and I'm here to represent Minnesota Atheists. We're the state's oldest, largest, and most active atheist organization. We view this as a matter of separation of church and state. It can be confusing because the same word, marriage, is used for both a civil contract and a religious ceremony. But we must keep in mind that these are two separate things. Today, you may hear testimony from some people saying that their God is in favor of same-sex marriage, and you may hear testimony from other people saying that their God is opposed to same-sex marriage. But fortunately, that's not a debate that you have to resolve. Government laws must have a secular basis. The best secular arguments in favor of same-sex marriage are the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection under the law, and the fact that long-term relationships, whether they're gay or straight, help to stabilize society. In our opinion, there are no secular arguments against same-sex marriage that hold up to scrutiny. Many of these arguments were used 50 years ago to oppose interracial marriage. I'd like to end on a personal note. My partner, Rachel, and I are heterosexuals, and we've been together for 17 years. We're both atheists, so we won't be getting married in a church or synagogue or temple or mosque. Instead, we'll seek a judge to perform a civil marriage ceremony. However, we won't get married until it's legal for everyone. Because how can we stand up in front of our family and friends, some of whom happen to be gay, on what is supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, knowing that that happiness is not available to them as well? So please pass this pro-marriage bill and make civil marriage available to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Berkshire. Simon Radecki. Next testifier after Simon Radecki will be Jenny Haig.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm Simon Radecki. I'd like to say that all the way up one side of my family tree, they voted conservative Republican every year. On my other side of the family tree, they voted half conservative Republican every year. But for some reason, my non-biological mother had to every day make sure that as she was going to work that she had power of attorney and everything on her person, so that if the worst happened, that she would be able to go into the hospital and take care of my brother and I. I was overjoyed this past election cycle, but I was more overjoyed this Thanksgiving. We go to my ancestral home, you could say, in Indiana, where my grandfather lives, and he had some new neighbors over. We had a big Thanksgiving dinner like we usually do, and he invited the new neighbors over to dinner. And for the first time in my life, my biological mother introduced Lee, my other mother, as her wife. And for me, that was an extremely powerful experience, because it's the culmination of a relationship that has existed for 25 years. They put 2 kids through college, and they provided for us with the loving care and commitment and long-term relationship that many heterosexual couples enjoy. I am extremely fortunate to have been raised in a community that was very accepting, was very friendly, and I'd like to say on behalf of all those younger than me, or those that live in communities that are not so accepting, those kids would really, really appreciate the passage of this bill. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Radecki. Next testifier is Jenny Haig, followed by Bob Minton.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to share my story. My name is Jenny Haig, and I live in St. Paul with my partner Aileen and our family, and we live in the same neighborhood, the Catholic neighborhood that I grew up in. In 2009, I was diagnosed with a rare form of bone cancer. My son was 3, and Aileen a law student. I found myself in a halo, unable to work or care for my own basic needs, such as combing my hair or bathing. I had 2 10-hour surgeries, radiation therapy in Boston, nearly a year of therapy and a feeding tube, and a neck rebuilt out of titanium. During this time, Aileen was a full-time law student and amazing caretaker to my son and I. I remember her writing her long paper on a rolling table in the hospital next to me and sleeping on a folding chair in the ICU. Family and friends showed their support by cooking meals, babysitting, cleaning, and even offering their homes to us. The Minnesotan values of supporting family and treating each other with respect were practiced daily, and these are values that are consistent with this bill. Aileen and I have taken precautions to protect our family in case I'm not here to do the protecting myself. Unfortunately, a will, a trust, and a healthcare directive don't offer the same protections as marriage. Many of you here, like me, have probably spent nights awake worrying about your kids or loved ones. Legal rights are not going to solve all of our worries, but they offer a structure that we can rely on when the goodwill of others is not enough in the face of the law. Marriage equality recognizes that the commitment, the love, and the struggles my family have faced are similar to yours and your families, and we deserve the same support. Please choose marriage equality for all families. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Haig. Next testifier is Bob Minton, followed by Richard Painter.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, my name is Bob Minton, and I'm chair of Former Priests for Marriage Equality. Last year, on May 17th, our group released a statement to the media opposing that proposed marriage amendment. Upon release, that statement had signatures of 80 former priests. And after the release, we gathered more names for a total of 103 names. This year, we have a follow-up statement that has been emailed to you, and I guess it's distributed also out to you. This statement supports legislation that affords everyone the same benefits, rights, and duties when they contract marriage in the state of Minnesota. 82 former priests from Minnesota signed this statement, and collectively, they devoted more than 1,000 years of service to their church. We support this bill, and we are pleased that it does not infringe on the rights of some churches or members of the clergy to deny their marriage rights to same-sex couples. Our fellow former priests found arguments against this bill wanting and unconvincing. And as our statement proclaims, we believe that state law should allow every individual the freedom to marry the person he or she loves. To that end, we, 82 former priests, call upon all members of the Minnesota House and Senate to pass this legislation during this current session. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Minton. Next testifier, Richard Painter, followed by Anthony Newby. I'm sorry, Christine Lindblom will be the next testifier after Mr. Painter. Go ahead, Mr. Painter. Please introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I thank you for inviting me to testify here today. 6 years ago, my wife and I moved here to Minnesota with our 3 children. We live in Edina. I moved here after finishing 2.5 years of service as the chief White House ethics lawyer and associate counsel to the President for President George W. Bush. I was thrilled last week to help found an organization called Republicans United for Freedom, and I will be chairing that organization starting this week. Republicans United for Freedom is committed to the ideals that we believe have been held by the Republican Party for many years, from the first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, to the last Republican vice president, Richard Cheney. And in Mr. Cheney's words, freedom means freedom for everyone. And that is what this bill is all about. The freedom to marry should be available for everyone. There are certain things that are none of the government's business, and I would be happy to list other things in other testimony. But who you marry is certainly none of the government's business. This is a matter to be resolved between loving individuals and their churches, their synagogues, their community. It is not a matter for the government to decide who is entitled to love who. And this bill should pass. It is the right thing to do. I have signed on to a brief submitted to the United States Supreme Court with 130 other Republicans, including Clint Eastwood, and also some of my former colleagues from the White House, urging marriage equality. And let me just say one thing about religious freedom. I was active in the White House Christian Fellowship when I was there in Washington. I'm a member of the Episcopal Church, and I want to ask you, what about our religious freedom? Those of us who belong to denominations that want to celebrate same-sex marriages. Is that being recognized in this state? Please pass this bill.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Painter. Next testifier, Kirsten Lindblom.
Good evening. Thank you, Chairman Lesch and members of the committee. My name is Kirsten Lindblom. 5 years ago in a little church in Austin, Minnesota, in front of 140 members of our family and friends, my partner Ginny and I made a lifelong commitment to one another. We decided that we wanted to make that public declaration of love, even though the state would not recognize it. At the time, we talked a lot about the options, but we felt that we wanted to have a ceremony in our community, in the space and place that we live and that we work. From that day, the hope has been that the state would one day make it possible for us and thousands of other couples to become legally married. 3 years ago, my Ginny was diagnosed with cancer. It's the slow-growing and deadly kind. She's beating the odds. She's pushing back the clock, but every day she's fighting for time. During the height of her illness, our marriage hope disappeared. In November 2012, we celebrated the passing of Ginny's expected expiration date and the defeat of the marriage amendment. Ginny continues to fight, and with the shift in Minnesota's political climate, our marriage hope has returned. As a woman facing the loss of her wife, I'm compelled. I am driven and I am determined to make the dreams that she dreams come true, and our one-day marriage is one of those dreams. Even though she's pushing back the clock, eventually cancer will take my wife. I have a student who wears a t-shirt that says that love holds no bounds, and I agree. But the greatest expression of love, marriage, is being held in bondage. It is bound, and you have the power to release it. You have the power to make Ginny's dream come true, and that's something that I so wish that I had. What a gift you hold. Please, send the Freedom to Marry bill to vote for my Ginny, for me, and for the thousands upon thousands of others who long to see their marriage dreams come true. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Lindblom. Members, that concludes the names on the list for public testimony on House File 1054 as amended. This is now the time for discussion among committee members. Members, after all the testimony is exhausted, after all the comments from members of the committee on House File 1054 are exhausted, we will take a vote. A roll call has already been requested. Comments from members of the committee. Representative Holbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we weren't able to have any discussion around the A1 amendment, and I'm just curious what the deleted language on page 4, what the intent of that was, and why the decision to delete it.
Representative Clark.
Madam Chair, we did discuss it briefly, but I was just thinking maybe a call for the person who's been working with me on that. Well, actually, I think Representative Simon, that was you who worked on that, wasn't it?
Representative Simon.
Representative Holberg, the language was probably a little bit too broad and could have been more specific. There are a lot of different subject matters that this might apply to, and the best approach, at least from my standpoint, would be to go over this subject matter by subject matter, probably in some future bill. But breadth is the primary reason.
Representative Holberg.
Mr. Chair, I'm still not clear what you were trying to protect, or what were you trying to carve out or accomplish that I'm not even understanding what the intent of the language was in the first place, let alone whether it was nuanced in the right way.
Sure. Yeah, as I understand the language, what it would say is that if there's some way that the federal government qualifies or describes marriage, then the state would construe that to mean treating spouses of the same sex in the manner as spouses of opposite sexes, line 4.10 and 4.11. I guess the problem is breadth in the sense that, as you imply, this doesn't refer to any specific subject matter, benefits, taxation, spending, anything like that, and it's better to take care of those in more of a pinpoint kind of fashion than it is to just broadly say that wherever there's a conflict, no matter where it might be, this language applies. It's too broad.
Representative Holbert.
All right. I appreciate the information because I wasn't even sure exactly. I mean, it read to me that no matter what the feds decided in Minnesota, marriage would be what we say, and I'm not so sure we even have the authority to do that, but...
Is that it, Representative Holbert? Representative Simon, did you have anything else? Any other comments? Okay.
I think maybe Representative Urusso is trying.
Representative Urusso?
Well, I was just going to comment that since what the amendment does is delete that whole bit, then we really don't need to quibble about what the whole bit would have done because it's not there anymore.
Well,
Representative Holberg.
That's okay, it's been a long day, Mr. Chair.
It has been, Representative Holberg.
I was just trying to understand the language, and if it comes back in some other form, what the original intent was. So words matter around here, and I had, if I might...
Go ahead, Representative Holberg.
The other thing that I'm struggling with, and I, believe it or not, spent a couple hours this afternoon actually watching the Senate hearing on this bill, and I know, I'm sorry, but maybe raised more questions. But there was quite a discussion around the Minnesota Human Rights Act and the strength of that. And there were concerns expressed about if an individual's religious belief was one that did not support a same-sex marriage. And in the bill as written, we have a carve-out for nonprofits. But what the ramifications were for, say, business owners that provided services. We have heard testimony, at least the Senate did today, and there's been stories in the news of, say, a company that provides a catering service or a floral service. Under the Minnesota Human Rights Act, what would be their rights for religious objection should this bill pass?
Representative Clark.
Mr. Chair, maybe I'll start by saying that this bill doesn't expand or contract in any way the protections that are already in the Minnesota Human Rights Act. So those discussion, I was there for part of the Senate hearing too, I didn't hear it all. But I think the answer over and over was, what we're talking about in this bill has to do with marriage, not with any changes to the existing protections against discrimination for businesses or the religious exemptions for religious organizations that are in the Minnesota Human Rights Act. Those are intact. We're not changing that. So a lot of that discussion was kind of about an issue that really isn't before us. What we're really talking about here is the marriage, a change to the meaning of marriage, not to the Minnesota Human Rights Act.
And, Mr. Chair, I understand that, but as I listened to the testimony and looked at the language of the bill, if it was true that nothing changed and religious protections were still the same, then the language regarding the nonprofits in the bill would not be necessary either. And so I'm trying to have a better understanding of, we have language in the bill for nonprofits. I think it's trying to get at the church issue, private schools, et cetera. And so if under the current Minnesota Human Rights Act, those organizations have protections for religious freedom, if you will, then why the need for that language? I don't have a clear understanding of, if we need this language for nonprofits, where does the for-profit sector of the state stand relative to being able to assert a religious objection to providing a service in the marketplace? Or do they have no standing to do that?
Representative Clark.
Mr. Chair, and I'll answer the best I can, and then maybe we could ask for one of our lawyerly persons to explain a little bit more. But here's my understanding. Again, the Minnesota Human Rights law, the existing law right now, does tell us what for-profit businesses, and that's what you're asking about, can or cannot do. That's not changed. What we are doing by adding this language here is just to, I think, be really, really clear about the religious exemptions and what it covers. And that was, there's two places where that happens, and that was done on the relationship to the law, rules of construction, religious freedom, the Human Rights Act, and we also did it on the part that you just mentioned, actually the refusal to solemnize protecting the right of religious organizations not to have to marry, if that's the religion. So maybe I should ask maybe one of our people who have crafted this language. I wonder if Mr. Carpenter would come forward.
And Mr.
Representative Holberg.
Representative Clark, I understand that we're not changing the Human Rights Act, but we are changing the definition of marriage. And so that adds a different question. If you are, say in the case of Vermont, somebody that provides catering services for wedding receptions, or the case of the florist, right now that issue isn't before them because there isn't a marriage that they have a religious objection to having legal status in Minnesota. That right now. So that's not a situation that presents themselves to a for-profit Minnesota business person. If the bill is passed, we change the definition of marriage, and as everyone in this room is very aware, there are some very deeply held religious beliefs around definition of marriage. In the Senate, there was an imam that testified. The structure of the Senate hearing was quite a bit different, but a number of people testified about deeply held religious beliefs that I think have some protection in the Human Rights Act of Minnesota. But if you could talk a little bit to the extent or not that extends to the public marketplace.
Representative Clark?
Well, I'll just say my understanding is that if a business is offering a public service right now under the Minnesota Human Rights Act, if they're offering a business product, they are not allowed to discriminate on a number of bases: race, religion, age, disability, gender, sexual orientation, and status according to public assistance. So those things continue to be prohibited by any business, so in the marketplace. So we haven't changed that.
And Mr. Chair, I understand that. I mean, I know that if this bill passes and I'm an employer, and if I don't want to offer insurance benefits to same-sex couples, I'd have to remove insurance benefits for all employees because you can't discriminate. It's either all in or all out. I'm talking about providing a service relative to the marriage event in which I say, I have a religious objection to same-sex marriage. And as such, I don't want to prepare flowers, or I don't want to cater an event, or I don't want to be the photographer. We heard testimony in the Senate about, another example was medical, offering medical treatment. Now, that's not directly related to the marriage ceremony itself, but various professionals that have a deeply held religious conviction that does not support same-sex marriage, are they able to assert that religious objection and refuse a service related to same-sex marriage and have protections under the Human Rights Act of the state of Minnesota?
I tried to explain it, but I don't think I explained it very well, so maybe I can ask Mr. Carpenter to
Mr. Chair, I think I'm trying to maybe get Mr. Carpenter to
Mr. Carpenter,
talk.
please introduce yourself for the record.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Dale Carpenter, and I teach at the University of Minnesota Law School constitutional law and the First Amendment, including religious freedom. So it's an issue of great importance to me. The marriage bill that you have in front of you today does not provide a cause of action of any kind for a person based on the fact that they have just been married. There is no provision in the bill for enforcement or remedies or anything like that for discrimination. So to the extent there is any legal liability, it would have to come out of the Minnesota Human Rights Act, which in one form or another, as you know, has existed for many decades. About 20 years ago, we added sexual orientation. So that's where we start. And then the analysis under the Act would start with what sorts of entities are covered, in what situations are those entities liable legally for various kinds of discrimination, what kind of discrimination is it, and then even if you pass all of those tests, you have to ask questions about whether there are exemptions for that particular kind of entity. And the Minnesota religious freedom exemptions are among the most generous in the country in an anti-discrimination law. What's interesting about that, and it can be a very complicated discussion, obviously, what's interesting about that discussion is none of it is affected in any way by the marriage bill. So that, for example, a couple who is simply having a commitment ceremony could go to the wedding photographer today or to the cake baker and be refused a service and potentially have a claim under the Minnesota Human Rights Act. The fact that they're married or not doesn't make a difference to the outcome of their lawsuit under the Human Rights Act. The analogy that I would draw is to the New Mexico wedding photographer's case, which you may have heard about. In that case, of course, New Mexico has no recognition of same-sex marriage. And there was a claim that a photographer refused to photograph a commitment ceremony for a same-sex couple. They sued under the New Mexico law, and that is still being worked out in the courts in New Mexico. It's a very complicated issue. The most direct precedent we have on point about this particular question that I think you're asking about those who are in the for-profit business, so we're not talking about religious entities or nonprofit religious entities, but in the for-profit world who have religious and other objections to various services, is probably a case called McClure versus Sports and Health Club, which was decided by the Minnesota Supreme Court in 1985, before we had sexual orientation coverage in the state. And in that case, the Minnesota Supreme Court held that the sincerely held religious beliefs of the owners of a place of public accommodation did not permit them to disregard the requirements of the Minnesota Human Rights Act once they chose to enter the marketplace. That's been the law in Minnesota now for going on something at like 30 years, at least according to the Minnesota Supreme Court. That's not affected one way or another by this bill.
Representative Holber.
Mr. Chair, I think it is in that you're changing the definition of marriage that may be contrary to some people's religious beliefs. I mean, the underlying issues, I agree, aren't changed by this, but so is it fair then to surmise you could have a situation where you have two parties in a lawsuit in the state of Minnesota, both asserting protections under the Human Rights Act, one being the right to marry under a sexual orientation, and one being religious, deeply held religious belief, and they then having to sort those out?
Professor Carpenter.
Yes. Those kinds of conflicts have come up in other states in the country where there's a claim under a state human rights law that there's been discrimination. The defendants defend with some exemption in the state law. Barring that, they defend with a constitutional protection claim, and those are being worked out. I've actually filed a brief in the New Mexico photographer's case supporting the religious freedom of this wedding photographer, against probably what some of my allies would prefer, but that's what I've done. But Minnesota law stands on its own base. There are constitutional freedoms. They have not generally applied to for-profit businesses, although I've argued that in some cases they probably should. That'd probably be a subject for a very long and interesting constitutional law seminar. But it's not something that this bill resolves either way. I take your point that we're talking about marriage and a status that has implications under some 500 statutes in Minnesota. That's definitely the case. Those provisions in Minnesota law, however, provide rights for individuals as against their government, not as against private entities. And this bill seeks to make it clear that citizens in Minnesota, if they make the commitment to each other as against their government, cannot be discriminated against on this basis.
If I might, can you then explain maybe with some greater detail than we've heard thus far, if in fact you believe that there are already these protections for religious freedoms, why the language in the bill spelling out the nonprofits, why the necessity for that?
Professor Carpenter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe there are about 4 different places in the bill where there's some discussion of religious exemptions or freedom, depending on how you count the provisions. I believe those provisions do one of two things, and in some cases both things. Either they reaffirm that nothing has been changed in existing law and in protecting religious freedom in this bill, or they, to some extent, make it even clearer, or you could say even expand to some extent the degree of religious freedom that's provided in the bill to make it absolutely clear that with respect to ceremonies, for example, there will be no requirement that religious institutions provide their facilities, their faith is protected, and so on. If there was any doubt about that, we wanted to make sure that, I think the authors of the bill wanted to make sure that that was clear. So I think it was a matter of clarity and reaffirmation.
Representative Holberg.
Mr. Chair, I'll defer to others for a while here.
Thank you. Other comments from members? Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this has been, thank you for conducting a fair hearing, Mr. Chair. And I want to say that, I'm disappointed that we're even taking up this divisive issue and we don't have the budgets done here. And this is an issue that is very divisive, as we've heard testimony today. And additionally, the people of Minnesota were told this past fall and summer that if a no vote would mean that there would be no change in the statute, and here we sit trying to change the statute. And also in light of the recent polling with the Star Tribune that barely a third of the people in the state of Minnesota are in favor of changing the statute. I'm troubled that we're here at all, but I just want to thank you again for running a very, very fair hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Scott. Representative Newberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo the sentiments of Representative Scott here. I spent my afternoon, for those that don't know, I'm a freshman, and I'm new to this committee, and it's a privilege to serve here. I wanted to be up to speed on this whole issue. So I spent my afternoon watching civil law tapes from 2 years ago and Ways and Means tapes on this exact argument when it was the constitutional amendment was being forwarded. And I want to echo some sentiments here, and I'm trying to understand this. At the time, we had some very senior members whom are on this committee that I respect. I really do. If you go back to May 2nd, 2011, House File 1613, watch the tapes, especially the last 30 minutes. You can reference what I'm talking about here, but at that point, we were trying to, through House File 1613, trying to further define marriage. And the comments that were made from people that I highly respect were we're wasting our time on this when we should be solving the budget issue. From another member who I highly respect, at the same hearing said, instead of balancing the state budget, we're having meetings on constitutional amendments. When I went to the Ways and Means Committee, watched that, there were three other very senior members who expressed the exact same sentiments. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get a basic understanding as to why is it different this time. This legislature is facing a budget, a lack thereof. We haven't even begun to address that, and yet we're now trying to wrestle through a very distinctive change in the very fundamental fabric of our society, yet we haven't even, I'm just going to take and put it on, I'm going to take it and just put it strictly from 2 years ago, what the argument was. So if we haven't even begun to tackle our budget issues, why is this at the forefront? And I just echo the words from the senior members from this committee who convinced me that the budget was a priority. You won that argument in my mind. So I sit here 2 years later after listening to some very well-crafted and very fine arguments trying to figure out what makes it so different this time when we're facing the exact same dynamic. So I'm thinking out loud, and I'm just expressing that, and I just want to thank you for your time.
Thank you, Representative Newberger. Comments from members? Representative Wortman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One thing I wanted to say before I answer Representative Newberger's question, because I have a feeling I might be one of those senior members who made those comments when we had that debate 2 years ago. But we heard a lot of testimony today, and some of the things that were said were factually wrong, medically wrong, legally wrong, historically wrong, biblically wrong. And, you know, I think out of respect for the testifiers, we let people express their opinions without saying the things with which we disagreed. But I just want to be clear that silence during the recitation of alleged historical facts that weren't true or alleged medical facts that weren't true doesn't mean that acquiescence to their truth. So I think that there were some things that were regrettable that were said. The difference, I would say, Representative Newberg, between this year and the last time this issue came up was this bill is going to the General Register where it will sit until the budget is done. We have a deadline for policy bills of March 15th, and this bill is respecting that process, and I think that's appropriate. The other thing is the Democrats didn't put this issue in front of the state of Minnesota. This issue came before the state of Minnesota because of the vote that happened on the constitutional amendment that was proposed. This was not an issue that Democrats running for office and Democrats wanting to take back the majority went out and raised as an issue. It was an issue that was raised by Republicans, put on the ballot, and now the issue is before us. I think the question has been called on equal rights. And the question for us, as the people in charge of the institution right now, is will we take up that issue of equal rights, and will we do the right thing? The third thing I'll say that's different is the bill that was before the committee 2 years ago was about taking away rights. This is about granting rights. The issue 2 years ago was arguably electioneering to try to have an outcome in the election that was favorable. We are taking up this issue at our peril. It's not for electoral advantage, and it may not work out that way. But the issue of equal rights is before us, and we're going to address it. To the merits of the bill, I'm a co-author. I'm proud to be a co-author. I don't think I need to say anything more about what a great bill it is.
Thank you, Representative Portman. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. And sorry I had to miss part of the testimony this evening. As many people know, we are multitasking and we're in many different places at the same time. But I am very glad that I was here earlier in the day and got to hear all of the testimony in the earlier committee hearing. And as Representative Portman has alluded to, sometimes it was very difficult to listen to. And, of course, we all heard a lot of extremely moving testimony in this committee as well. And the comment that I wanted to make in response to some of that is to remind people that when we're talking about marriage, that we're talking here about our civil institution, the state. The state doesn't sanctify anything. We are government. We don't sanctify anything. That is the job of religious institutions. All we do here in the state of Minnesota is create a legal status. We give people a bundle of rights. And that bundle of rights is what we call civil marriage in this context. That's what we're talking about here, civil marriage. I've been married quite a long time to my husband. We have a civil marriage that is recognized by the state of Minnesota. That is all we have. What religious aspect to that we have is really none of the business of any of the people sitting around this table. So I just want to make that very, very clear to the people who came and talked to us about their deeply held religious beliefs. And there was a dialogue here, too, with Representative Holberg and the people at the testifying table about deeply held religious beliefs and so on. And people can hold whatever religious beliefs they want to. But when it comes to the state of Minnesota, I believe that we have to treat everybody the same. And that means that when we give that bundle of legal rights that we call civil marriage, that we cannot discriminate against people on the basis of gender. And we have done that for far too long. So I also wanted to respond to the young girl hours ago who sat at that table. I think she was 11 years old, and in a very dramatic way asked us which of her parents she didn't need. And of course, we weren't responding. We were letting everyone testify. So we let her ask that question, and it went unanswered. But I want to answer her because she was asking the wrong question. It was really the wrong question, because this is not about that girl and her family. Because every child who has two parents, clearly they need both of their parents. And if they have a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or whoever is in their family, clearly those people have great meaning to them. But families are not all the same. And I think just as that girl was saying, which of her parents didn't she need, that was a very unfair question. But I think that gay and lesbian citizens of this state are also asking us a question here. And their question is, why should my family be any less valid than your family? And my answer is, there's no reason, and it's time for that to end.
Thank you, Representative Liebling. Comments from members?
Sure.
Representative Holbrook.
I'm sorry, I have another question on another issue on the bill, and I think this one will be a little easier and a little quicker.
Go ahead, Representative Holbrook.
It's related to the language on page 4, lines 12 through 15. And in the state of Minnesota, if a couple is unmarried, the physical and legal custody goes to the mother unless there's a court order otherwise. And that's something really important, especially to young single mothers. And I want to, at least for the record, make sure that it's not your intent to change that standard with this bill.
Professor Carpenter.
I would not read this language to change that standard, but I would defer to the authors of the bill and the sponsors to do so. It's not my...
Right, and
Representative Holbrook.
The language that in particular concerns me, where it says, including those that establish parentage presumptions based on marriage, because in the case of unmarried mothers, and this affects, from what I understand, nearly half of all births in Minnesota right now are to unmarried mothers, that we provide that they have legal and physical custody. And I don't think that we should inadvertently change that by some broad rules of construction language in another area of law.
Thank you, Representative Holbrook. Your comments? Were you requesting an answer from a specific member, Representative Holbrook?
I'm not a lawyer. There's plenty of them on the other side of the table here.
Any lawyers
staff,
want to
I don't know if anybody wants to weigh in on this, if we need more language to make sure that that's not the case, or...
Next time you'll have to set the hook, Representative Holbrook. Is there anyone that cares to comment on that? Well, maybe we'll come back around on that, Representative Holbrook. But for now, we're going to move on to other members, unless you have another question.
I don't. I just want to make sure that we're not inadvertently changing that standard, because I think it would cause a lot of problems.
Understood. Give us one moment, Representative Holbrook. I think we may have an answer. Professor Carpenter?
Well, the language, again, it's not my reading of the bill to do that. I'm in agreement with you about that. The language that I think you just pointed to is at lines 13 and 14 in the bill on page 4.
And if I might...
Representative Holbrook.
Right.
Responsibilities of spouses or parents under the laws of the state, including those that establish parentage presumptions based on marriage. What I believe the design of this is, and what I believe this accomplishes, is that it's common in the law when a child is born to a married couple that the couple is presumed to be the are presumed to be the parents of the child. And that's what this is an attempt to address in the context of same-sex couples, ensuring that that child has two legal parents and not just one. So in a way, it's designed to address the very problem that I think you're discussing, which is we don't want children to end up having only the single legal parent.
Mr. Chair, I understand the need for that language in your bill, but in addition to presenting the issue of unmarried mother, and I'm really concerned with these young moms that dad may be long gone and not good situations. Right now, I think while it's not perfect, what the standard is around that works. In the case where they're not married, and maybe this is your intent, you also would, with this language, have unmarried, so then you'd have unmarried same-sex couples that could sign parentage agreements like we do right now with, a lot of times, the fathers will sign a parentage agreement in these unmarried situations in the hospital to establish parentage.
Professor Carpenter?
I don't know
Sorry,
that these
go
are
ahead.
issues we're going to solve here tonight, but I'd like somebody with some family law expertise to make sure that we accomplish that which you want to do, that you have gender-neutral language around children of same-sex marriage, but not have inadvertent consequences for children of unmarried couples in the state of Minnesota.
Mr. Chairman?
Professor Carpenter, if you're able to just connect with Representative Holbrook offline after the hearing, that would be helpful.
Mr.
On that.
Chairman.
Representative Clark.
Yeah, and I just want to say I'm very interested in us addressing your issue, so let's plan to do that.
Thank you, Representative Holbrook. Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm not sure if this is going to be off message or not, but I want to disagree a little bit with Representative Liebling, actually, and Representative Hortman. I think that we are addressing this question today because it is a moral question. It is written in law that we have to address because the views of society and the views of people who care about marriage and who care about families are changing very quickly. We, as a state government, have created a privilege and a right in marriage. And I think most of us would agree that the right to marry is an essential liberty. We face this question whether it's before the budget is passed, after the budget is passed. You did not, I don't think, hear me, Representative Newberger, say that we shouldn't address these questions because I think we need to. And the question is whether we should include everyone who has all of the characteristics of a traditional marriage in commitment, love, caring for each other, possibly a resolution to become boring with time, which is something that happens to married couples. All of those characteristics of marriage and all the character that goes into making a marriage work. Those people who have those characteristics and that character for marriage, whether they should be included or not. And they're not, but for one immutable characteristic. And I think that's the moral question before us. Just, and as I think about it, the traditional arguments or the traditional sentiment against including same-sex couples in marriage fall along the lines of kind of moral questions of sanctity, authority, loyalty, and the question of harm. And I think all of those questions have really been resolved in favor of including those people who are so far not included. The harm to families who are not able to have protection of marriage, I think, is very clear, and I think was very amply demonstrated today and is throughout the last campaign and through the last several years. The harm is real. The question of sanctity and whether this is an institution or a relationship or an arrangement that is somehow sacred, I think that is made sacred by the commitment of two people. I think it is made sacred by the inclusion of children and the commitment to live life together. The question of authority, I think for a long time religious authority was fairly unified in its belief that marriage should not exist between people of the same sex. I think that religious authority has dramatically changed its views, and I think we fool ourselves if we do not think that as legislators and as a state government we don't legislate morality based on the authority of religious organizations. We do because it reflects the sentiments of our constituents. But I think that authority of religious organizations has changed and is frankly very mixed today. And one of the last things I would consider one of the moral tests is loyalty. And we don't talk about that a great deal, but it's loyalty to people within a group, people in the community. And to me, passing marriage equality is about welcoming families that exist, the families that are out there. It's welcoming them fully into our community and demonstrating the loyalty of Minnesotans to them as they would demonstrate to us, I think, if the question were reversed. And so I do think it is fundamentally a moral question. We're going to disagree on where that comes down based on moral views, but to me, the morality of it is very clear. I strongly support it. And Representative Clark, I'm very proud to be here with you today.
Thank you, Representative Winkler. Representative Johnson.
Mr. Chair. Professor Carpenter, I just want a short question on back on the issues that Representative Holberg had a little while ago that I was never able to hear an answer. So I'm going to put in a hypothetical situation. Let's say I own a catering business, and due to my religious beliefs, I could not, in good conscience, have my catering service, provide the service at a wedding of a same-sex marriage just because of my religious beliefs. Under the current Minnesota law, would I be sued?
Professor Carpenter.
Under current Minnesota law, without the marriage bill passing, if a couple came to you seeking your business, they would have to file suit under the Minnesota Human Rights Act. They would have to find a provision that applied to your business. Then they would have to establish that they fit within the definitions of the statute. Then we'd have to determine whether there was an exemption that applied. Under the precedent that I read earlier, I think the Minnesota Supreme Court has said, in interpreting the statute long before sexual orientation was added, that when you enter the marketplace, you are subject to the rules of anti-discrimination. It's a decision that we as a society made about a century ago, that when you enter the marketplace, you are subject to certain rules that you provide services to the public. That is common throughout the United States. And if you could be sued at all, you could be sued today without the marriage bill passing. So I hear legitimate concerns in your question. There's no doubt about that. Those questions, I think, are best aimed at the Minnesota Human Rights Act itself and could be considered in a proposed amendment to the Minnesota Human Rights Act or some other bill, but they're not. There's nothing that this marriage bill changes in the result of that action.
Representative Johnson.
Mr. Chair, Professor Carlson, right now under Minnesota law, I would not be providing that service at a wedding. I could be providing that service at trying to think of the proper word here, a service where they're just performing their, or it's not a religious service, but just even a civil service, but it's not a religious service. But under this new proposed law, it'd now be a marriage. And would there be a difference? Yes, I'm looking for a simple yes or no answer.
I don't think.
Carpenter.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I don't think that I hope this is good. I don't think that the marriage bill makes a difference. So the answer would be no, it does not make a difference. I think that businesses, under the Minnesota Human Rights Act, businesses are subject to its provisions regardless of the service they're providing and regardless whether their objections are religious or not, if the statutory criteria are met and if you have engaged in a form of discrimination that is prohibited under the statute. There are about 14 categories of discrimination under the statute, including race, sex, sexual orientation, veteran status, and so forth. So someone hypothetically suing you would have to establish that they met the criteria for application of the statute, and this bill does not make a difference in that outcome.
Representative Johnson.
In my personal opinion, I believe it would. I know many, in fact, I have a number of friends and some relatives that live that lifestyle, and I love them dearly. But the difference is right now that I see is we're not doing a wedding ceremony at this time. By adding the wedding ceremony, now it's getting to a different level where it's changing the law and how that application is.
Professor Carpenter.
It may well make a difference to individuals who are defendants in these lawsuits who may object more to a marriage than a civil commitment or a civil union ceremony. Under the law, it doesn't change anything. The fact that you are married doesn't make a difference in the outcome of the claim that you make under the Minnesota Human Rights Act or under this bill. We've had tens of thousands of same-sex marriages performed in the United States as we sit here today, tens of thousands. Very few cases have actually arisen in which same-sex couples have sued for recognition of their marriages from a baker or florist, and nothing has turned in those lawsuits on whether they were married or not. It's simply a matter of previously existing anti-discrimination law. Minnesota has struck a balance in the past few decades. It has among the strongest protections for religious freedom in the country, but at the same time, it recognizes that people must be protected from discrimination in ordinary civic transactions when the discrimination against them is invidious.
Representative Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members. I had a choice of either talking about making it personal, telling my stories. As in my culture, we talk, and how we talk to our children and how we talk to each other often is through story. And but we don't have like 20 minutes for me to tell you my story. So I'm going more on towards the lawyer side and the activist and the advocate. And I was reading an article. It was a history of same-sex marriage. It was written by William Eskridge Jr. It was, his Yale Law School, and it was part of a faculty scholarship series paper. So I'm going to sort of paraphrase from that, and so. This is what I was thinking about earlier, is that we have heard today that denying same-sex marriage relates not only to the belief that procreation is essential to marriage, but more deeply to fears of homosexuality, just as denying mixed-race marriage was related to deep-seated racial tensions. I believe that marriage is a social construct, and thus it is not and cannot be neutral. The social construction of marriage involves the playing out of power among various groups, as Representative Winkler stated, and that power often divides and oppresses. It should be evident from the testimony heard here today that marriage is dynamic. Because marriage is linked to other attitudes and institutions, including this institution, it will change as attitudes and institutions change. And the fact that I am here and part of this institution means that it already changed, and that many that sit left of me here who are here is evident that this institution has changed. And then I want to end with this statement, and that is sort of sums up what my life has been about, as not only as a lesbian but also as a American Indian, and something that is neither one is a lifestyle.
Please, understood. Please, no outbursts with respect to any testifiers or members of the committee who speak out of respect. Thank you. Representative Allen.
And again, this first sentence is paraphrasing. Institutions, including marriage, change when subordinated groups identify their oppression and resist it. And I am proud to be among those, along with Representative Clark, among those that resist it.
Thank you, Representative Allen. Representative Russo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. I'm a little bit hesitant to describe this as granting a right to people. Under the principles of our country, equal rights are supposed to be shared by all, and I really feel that what we would be doing is finally recognizing a right of some of our citizens. But I also want to speak to the business aspects of this. There are quite a number of businesses that would welcome the chance to capture the trade involved with marriages between same-sex partners. In my personal experience, I know a couple of young women who, tired of waiting for Minnesota, chose to get married in Iowa. And they were going to just go down there and get married and then come back and have the party. But they decided, Iowa deserved to be rewarded for that, so they had the whole party there. But since then, they have had to spend a lot of money in Minnesota. They've had to spend it on lawyers. Now, I know some of you are lawyers, so I'm like cutting into your business. But they've had to spend money to take care of their wills, which my husband and I finally got around to doing wills, but we didn't have to, because Minnesota state law sets it out pretty clearly what would have happened if either of us had died. And they've taken care of their advanced care directives, and we did finally get around to taking care of that, but we could drag our feet because Minnesota state law takes care of that pretty well for us. And they've recently had a young daughter, and they had to spend a couple $1,000s on lawyers and fees and whatnot. And we didn't have to do any of that. My husband was automatically granted parenthood of my 3 children. And he's never had to do anything for that. He's never had to talk to a lawyer. He's never had to file, it was automatic under the law. And so we take for granted, you've probably heard about the 515 things. But you have to realize those are not special things. Those are things that we take for granted. That all I had to do was fill out that marriage license and stand up in front of some people. And I got all of that, all at once, and along with it a free name change.
Representative Newberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've just been kind of mulling over in my head what Representative Hortman was saying, and I just need to make a point here, make this clear, that I spent the better part of this afternoon listening to the arguments of some of the finest legal minds I've yet to meet, and I'm not saying that to score brownie points. I've gotten to know you folks, and you're really smart. The point I'm trying to make is you convinced me 2 years ago. The dynamics, we're 10 weeks out from the end of the session, and we have yet to really see anything of a budget. And the dynamics really are, to me, they're the same. You guys convinced me 2 years ago, and I'm just not convinced that this is a different thing, and that the timing, the characteristics are all pretty much the same, and I just want to echo that, to let you know that 2 years ago, you're the ones that talked me into the whole timing issue, and I'm quite impressed. So I just want to thank you for that, and just to let you know that I'm not convinced that we're arguing 2 different things here. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Newberger. Representative Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I first want to say a word about what we've heard today about some of the religious liberty provisions in this bill. I think, looking at this bill, compared with the protections in place in other states that have already legalized same-sex marriage, this is one of the most, and quite possibly the most protective, even aggressively protective, bill in the country. You look at the categories that legal scholars on both sides of this issue look at when they're looking at religious protections, and you look at the language in this bill. This bill explicitly allows clergy and institutions to refuse to reform marriages. Not all states do. We would. This bill specifically allows religious organizations to provide goods or services related to the marriage ceremony. Not all states do. This bill does. So would we if this passes. This bill also says that religious organizations are defined very broadly to include faith-based social service agencies and other affinity-based organizations. Not every state does that. It's about half and half. This bill does. We would. And finally, there's even a separate provision in this bill that would allow religious organizations to do what they would in most circumstances when it comes to things like adoption or foster care or other social services. Not many states do that. Precious few. We do. We would if this passes. That really is, I think, a tremendous thing, and I think it strikes the right balance. And I hope, at least, given what I think are some very thoughtful and useful concerns expressed by members of this committee and ones that I take very seriously, I think that's something worth knowing and worth thinking about, that great care was taken in this bill to make sure as much as possible that religious liberty and religious freedom and freedom of conscience was protected. There may be other suggestions along the way, and I'm sure there are proponents that would be open to hearing those suggestions, but as it is right now, this is a very, very strong and very, very generous bill in those categories. Second, just a word about polling, because as we all know from either our own races or others that we've followed, or any contest in the public mind, be it election or anything else, the wording of the poll matters. And I, too, saw the Star Tribune poll, but I noticed that there's one word that appears to make a difference when I look at all the polls, including one that was flip-flopped, that came out from a private group about 2 days before the Star Tribune poll, and one that came out a little bit earlier this year, is that when you explain to people that it's civil marriage, like the kind you could get at City Hall, when you explain that it's a civil contract and civil marriage, then the support shoots up when they know that fact, and then the result gets flip-flopped, notwithstanding the Star Tribune poll. So I think, as we all know, it depends on how you ask the question. The other thing that I don't think really is in doubt is where the trend line is, where things are headed. And it doesn't take a statistician to show the tremendous, almost light-speed movement on this issue in the last few years. Keep in mind, when I first got here in 2005, along with Representative Hortman, Representative Liebling, others in my class, the version of the constitutional amendment then, in 2005, only 8 years ago, some of which, and there are members in this room that voted for that, would have made unconstitutional not only marriages, but civil unions. It would have said not only are they illegal, they are unconstitutional, supreme law. Now I'm hearing that behind the scenes there may be even a strategy by opponents to embrace civil unions, lest we go to marriages. I mean, how times have changed. In 8 years, some of the same people are now almost hoping for civil unions so as to stave off marriage, when just 8 years ago, the constitutional amendment that we voted on, March 31st, 2005, go and look it up in the House Journal, that constitutional amendment said that civil unions, too, would be unconstitutional. So, whether it's Laura Bush or Dick Cheney or a host of others from across the political spectrum, I think we know where this issue is headed historically. And then finally, just in terms of the nature of this bill, religiously or otherwise, I've said about this bill, but others as well, that there are three basic types of policy bills that we pass in this place. Bills that forbid something, bills that require something, and then there's this happy middle ground, which is a bill that simply allows something. It's not telling anyone what to do. It's not telling anyone what they can't do. It's simply tolerating, permitting, and allowing two people to do something that they desperately, desperately want to do, and in the grand scheme of things is hurting no one. That's what this bill does. And I like to say that it's not just live and let live, it's live and let love. And that's what we ought to do.
Thank you, Representative Simon. Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I look around this table and I don't see too many rural members. Representative Anderson and Mr. Neuberger are from more rural from rural areas. And I don't have with me the map of Minnesota of the results of the marriage amendment. But most of the people sitting around this table were metrocentric. And the map of Minnesota, in some of these rural areas, the marriage amendment passed 60% or more. And I just don't want us to get ahead of ourselves here in this committee, because we have a large diversity of people in our membership, and they represent people too. And regardless of what the folks around this table who we represent, there are other people to take into consideration here. We have to take this bill very carefully. We have an entire state, much of which doesn't feel the same way as maybe some of the people around this table and around the people in the metro area, and I just wanted to be on record as saying that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Scott. Comments from members? Representative Hillstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I think that we have an obligation to lead on this issue. Minnesota needs to step up and lead. It is time we grant people the civil rights that they deserve. I encourage members to vote yes.
Thank you, Representative Hillstrom. Comments from members? Representative Clark. Representative Pamar.
Just real quickly, Mr. Chair, I know it's been a long day. I just want to first of all thank Representative Clark for all the work you've done on this bill. And I was in this body when we had the debate on DOMA, and I remember I got up on the House floor and my legs were shaking, but I so wanted to oppose that bill, and I so wanted to stand with you in solidarity. And to see how far we've come and to see how close we're getting, I couldn't be more thrilled. And we will deal with the budget. We will deal with the budget. By May 20th, we'll be out of here, or before. We'll deal with it. We know how serious that is. But we can deal with other issues, and the time has come. I just absolutely believe that with all my heart, and I would just like to echo what Representative Simon said. We've heard about budgets, we've heard about morality, we've heard about religion, but, when you listen to the testimony of some of the folks who've come here, that fundamentally what people are talking about is love. And why aren't we advocating that? Why aren't we embracing that? Why aren't we encouraging that? And we have the opportunity to do that today. And I know this isn't an easy issue for folks, and I've read all the emails, but this is the time, this is the year, this is the day. I hope that people can vote yes on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Pamar. And Representative Clark, before your final comments, just a comment from the chair. Representative Newberger, I hear you on your comments and your concerns. I remember 2011, and I remember out of the 11 years now that I've spent serving in the legislature, out of 6 budget cycles, that was the one year where the bill deadlines were reversed to have fiscal deadlines happen prior to policy bill deadlines in an effort to spur discussion and make things happen on the budget. It also resulted in a government shutdown that summer. There was no budget passed. There was no budget resolution prior to the time we moved on to talking about social issues. In this case, we have the same rules in place that we've had the other 10 years of my tenure, that being that policy bills occur first. So even now, as we speak, the governor is preparing a supplementary budget recommendation. That conversation is happening, but we are following the process here to ensure adequate discussion happens, and this doesn't fall off the table in the midst of all the wrangling towards the end of session. With respect to the issue, I want to thank you, Representative Clark, for bringing this forward. I abhor when religion is thrust into the midst of politics. I abhor it, but inevitably it happens. I consider myself a person of faith. I don't talk about my faith, but I do recall the faith leader about which I was taught growing up, Jesus Christ, who was attempted to be trapped by political issues, which he abhorred as well. And when he was attempted to be trapped, his response was, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God's." Members, we are not dealing with anything but, as stated, civil marriage here. I hope we can do that and bring fairness to the people of Minnesota. Representative Clark, final comments, and then we're going to take a vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee members, each and every one of you. It's been an honor to be at this table and listen to your discussion, your concerns, and I've worked with many of you on many different aspects of state law, and this one is especially important, I think, because, as has been described so well by some of you, I'm not going to repeat your beautiful arguments and beautiful statements. This is a matter of civil marriage. This is a matter of honoring and granting respect to all of our families. And I wouldn't be bringing this bill forward if I didn't know that what it will do will be to strengthen Minnesota's families. It will really strengthen us. It will bring us together. I don't see it as a divisive issue. I see it as a unifying issue. I really think that's possible if we all put our hearts and minds to it. So I just ask you to support this bill, help people understand what's in it and what is not in it. There's myths that happen around any piece of legislation, so please help people understand that there's very strong religious freedom protections in here, very strong. And that was deliberate. We spent a lot of time listening to people who were concerned about that when we were putting this bill together. And I want to thank all the people who helped write this bill. Representative Simon, you were right there at the table quite a bit of the time. I want to thank you especially. But the community was heard. And I do ask that you vote for this bill. We could make Minnesota the 9th state in the union. We're not the first. The 9th, and if we're not in a big hurry and maybe we get our budget passed and everything first, we may be like the 11th, because there's 2 other states that are sitting right on the verge of passing this legislation too. So I just ask you to please support this legislation and again strengthen all of our families, strengthen our communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative Clark. Representative Simon moves that House File 1054 as amended be recommended to pass and sent to the General Register. A roll call having been requested, the CLA will take the roll.
Chairman Lesch.
Aye.
Vice Chair Ellen.
Yes.
Representative Anderson.
No.
Representative Hillstrom.
Aye.
Representative Holberg.
No.
Representative Portman.
Aye.
Representative Howe.
No.
Representative Johnson.
No.
Representative Liebling.
Yes.
Representative Newberger.
No.
Representative Paymar.
Aye.
Representative Pugh.
No.
Representative Rosenthal.
Yes.
Representative Simon.
Yes.
Representative Scott.
No.
Representative Winkler.
Yes.
Representative DeRusso.
Yes.
Vote total being 10-7, motion passes. Members, there being no other business before the committee is adjourned.